To everyone. It's a pleasant Friday morning, and actually, I was looking at the chat box, and it's I'm very happy to see that our guests today are very engaged. That means even if it's a Friday, everyone's really excited for this session. So welcome to day 5, which talks about automation in the digital economy. And whenever I hear the word automation, one of the phrases that come into mind is making things easier. And that's precisely what I'm about to share today. We're about to take a deeper walk into how Nutanix makes IT infrastructure and operations a little bit easier for everyone, right? Now, we already know that in today's digital economy, today's digital age, everyone, businesses are challenged to operate in an ever-changing landscape. Most of you know this already. With the pandemic, with the changing of times, a lot is expected more from IT organizations. But then with these changes, with the different journey that IT teams take, we still find a lot of challenges, right? And for some of you who've had me as a guest previously in some of our engagements, because I'm seeing some familiar faces and names in the audience, we're still seeing the following challenges. IT systems and infrastructure is still very complex, and there are still a lot of manual tasks there. We see unpredictable operation, sometimes downtimes, unexpected downtimes, etc. We also see that a lot of organizations still cannot cope as fast as they would want to with the demands of their end users or their industry. We see that there's always that ongoing struggle between keeping apps secure and up to date. And actually, earlier this year, I'm sure everyone is aware, we've had that vulnerability attack from Log4j, right? So everyone was struggling to keep and update their systems, their applications. We also see that there's also some sort of tug of war between putting things on the cloud and on-premise. And for the last one, we also see that with innovation and growth comes the cost, and businesses are now struggling and trying to keep up with the increasing costs globally today. We do know that gas is pretty high these days, and IT also would like to align itself to the ever increasing costs of today's challenges and requirements, right? But if you guys will actually take a little bit more focus on the 6 things I've shared today, you'll see something very common. Let's compare this to the challenges maybe 5, 6, 10 years ago and today. I'll give you 2 seconds to think about it. What are some of the similarities that you see from the challenges maybe 5 years ago to the challenges that we're seeing today? Okay, time's up. Let me answer that for you. So, I know most of you got it correctly, if not all. And the answer is that it's the same challenges, right? Year in and year out, we talk about trying to better or improve things. We talk about trying to simplify this and that in terms of how IT is consumed and operated. But we find from different studies globally that the same challenges still apply today. And so Nutanix wants to take a step back and ask our prospects and our users as well to imagine a world where IT could do the following. Number one, iterate faster. Of course, speed is the game today. If an organization wants to capitalize on revenue or maybe a market share, they would have to immediately, almost instantly deploy whatever they want to. right? Second, build an information fortress. Uh, I know from a fact from my previous conversations with some of our customers and prospects that security, especially because of the pandemic, we would want to always, as the top priority, secure everything within the organization, whether it's an incoming access or maybe from the inside, protection from people or systems and processes from inside the organization. Imagine also if IT could easily comply to the performance requirements or regulatory, legal, and other requirements that are being set upon a certain organization, right? At this day and age, we always get to hear the terms, Awee, we have an audit, or Awee, it takes us so many days to comply to a certain standard. How do we minimize that? How many turn, maybe 1 month or 2 weeks worth of configuration and study and configure those things easily. And that will allow us to get more certification. That would allow us to comply easily and faster to the demands of any organization, right? The fourth item that we want you to imagine is bringing cloud scaling and agility wherever you are. That means in a hybrid cloud environment, it doesn't matter where you put your applications or your workload, whether it be on-premise or in the public cloud. If there is some solution that's able to simplify and link the two, then that would be very beneficial from our customers. That's what we hear. Now, all of these imaginative items or ideas that we want to realize today, Nutanix's goal is actually to provide solutions to help in each of these items. And that starts, all of these start with, I know what some of you are thinking, deploying already an HCI. So everything starts with deploying an HCI. And I'm about to share with you concrete steps on how to do it. So the first step, actually there's a step 0 to deploying an HCI, and it's about sizing the environment, right? We've gone from adding too much buffer to sizing customer requirements to just simply right sizing, just providing customers what they need today. As simple as that, right sizing the environment, and that's step 0. Step 1 is to deploy the nodes or the servers that will build eventually your Nutanix cluster. Step 2 would be to install simultaneously or automatically using an automation tool that we call Foundation. Now, Foundation, it's a tool that Nutanix developed. It basically installs the system for you, clusters all the resources together so that after you activate that tool, all you need to do is just wait for it to finish. And then in a few, maybe in less than an hour for small environments, it's ready for use, right? And the last step here is to run your virtual machines, right? Run your applications. Now, from the diagram on the right side of your screen, you're seeing that there are actually 3 layers to the environment. So you have the hardware at the bottom, you have the software layer, and you have your application layer, right? Those 3 layers. Now, you'll see them as we move forward in this session. Now, the workload VMs, these can be any type of workload. Some would run basic virtual machines, some will run databases, some will run VDI, some will run analytics software, etc., etc. So you can run anything as long as it's running on Windows or Linux operating systems, you can run them on the Nutanix platform. And you're also seeing one other virtual machine here at the left side of the diagram. We call it Prism Central. Now, for those who are not yet aware, Prism Central is actually what we also call the Nutanix GUI. So later on, I'll be interchanging between the two, Prism Central or the Nutanix GUI. Those are one and the same. And the reason I highlighted that is because most of the features you'll see later on will also be managed in a single pane of glass, and that's Prism Central. Okay. So again, everything starts with deploying an HCI environment. Now, after HCI, our customers would ask, Awee, what's beyond HCI? How can I further maximize or get the most out of my HCI investment? And I have three solutions to share for everyone today. The first one would be consolidating data and your file servers and your NAS, right? Basically consolidating your data. So in a lot of organizations today, you might have some sort of file servers, right? Some organizations might have NAS, physical NAS storage connected to your existing environment. Other organizations will have some sort of maybe Windows or Linux-based file servers that are running on maybe virtual machines, and they're sharing storage over the network. Now, imagine, or maybe some of you are already experiencing this. Imagine that you have to manage multiple different file servers in the organization. Maybe you have a hardware that's acting as a NAS. You have a virtual machine, maybe 3 Windows virtual machine that you have to manage and monitor day in and day out. Now, add these all up, it becomes a tedious task to monitor and manage for IT teams today. So what Nutanix proposes is to consolidate everything in the Nutanix cluster. Now, we have the same diagram that we had earlier. I just moved the workloads over to the left. So you still have your hardware layer, the software layer, and also your application layer. Now, to help consolidate data or your file servers in the organization, the first step is to simply log into the Nutanix GUI. And that's what we call Prism again. Step 2 is we create from the Nutanix GUI a file server cluster, right? So there's a button in the Nutanix GUI that allows users to create a file server cluster, right? Now, if you'll notice from the diagram, the file server VM cluster, there's a blue line connecting to each of the virtual machines in the cluster. The blue line signifies that the VMs form a cluster so that if one virtual machine fails, your operation will not fail. It can still reconnect to the other file server VMs and continue the transactions and processes that are already ongoing. That's step 2. Step 3 is to create the shares and exports, right? So you create folders and then you share it over the network. Now, aside from just creating shares, users also have the capability to implement quotas per share, to block files, and to choose what protocol to run, maybe SMB protocol or NFS protocol, right? With file blocking, you can ensure that your users in the organization will not save files that shouldn't be there. Like, for example, you don't want them to save movies that they downloaded from the internet, or maybe files that may be file extensions that may be considered as malware. So you can block them explicitly and configure that from the Nutanix GUI. The fourth step, and maybe the last step in consolidating data, is in the same Nutanix GUI, activate and use the file analytics feature, right? So the file analytics feature comes bundled in with the file server VMs, and what that does is provide users and organizations the capability to make sense out of their data. So what's this making sense out of their data mean? So you will know later on which users are accessing certain files, which files are being accessed by certain users historically, right? So you can do that historically. You can view all the users that made transactions in your Nutanix file server system, right? So you will know who created the file, read the file, updated or copied the file. You will also know who deleted certain files. And as a bonus, you will also find out who who among the users in the organization try to access certain files that they don't have any permissions to, right? So that gets flagged, and you will be able to see that and put that into a report or something for review later on, right? So that's consolidating your data inside the Nutanix platform. Now, what else? The second solution that I'm about to share is about securing the environment, and that's through a a solution that the industry generically calls microsegmentation. So what does this do? Okay. So again, we have this diagram that you're seeing. You have your hardware, the software layer, and your virtual machine workloads, right? Now, the first step to secure any virtual machine, regardless of what VLAN it's assigned to, the first step is simply activate the feature within Prism Central, right? So it's very easy. There's nothing to install. You just activate that feature, right? The second step is to categorize the different virtual machines. So it's up to you how you want to categorize your virtual machines. Now, for an easy example, I'm showing you in your screens right now that I group the different VMs in three groups. I called a certain set of VMs the web group, the app group, and the database group. Now, in your own use cases, these groupings can be different. You can group them maybe per system, maybe per department. That's completely up to you. But the point is, you're able to categorize the VMs through the GUI. So that's the second step, right? The third step is to define the firewall policies. So these are software defined firewall policy. If you notice the transition, the animation from this to this, right? So what we did is to explicitly determine which ports should be allowed on certain groups as an incoming port and which ports should be allowed as an outgoing port. Now let's look at this a little bit further. If you look at the web group of my virtual machines or applications, only port 80 and 8443 is allowed to pass through, right? Sorry, that's port 80 and 443. That's my HTTP ports because my web servers are exposed to the public, right? And the web group can only talk to my app group through port 8890. That's it. No other ports. And then for my app group, I'm only allowing 8890. And as an outgoing port, 1521. And my DB port can only allow incoming connections from port 1521. Now let's set an example, right? Now, let's say that one of my web virtual machines or systems get compromised, right? So one of these maybe had a malware attack of some sort. Now, that malware attack cannot easily crawl to other VM categories in my Nutanix cluster or my platform simply because it needs to know the exact port it needs to go through to be able to talk to a different group. Now, we all know that the database group is what some of my customers, or maybe you also call it the same, the database is or are the crown jewels of any organization, right? So if the web group gets compromised, there's no direct access from my web group going to my database group. And so we actually make it extremely hard for any attack to move from one category to another. And that's how we help organizations secure the environment. Now, there was one question that was asked to me a few months back, and the question was like, uh, so are you saying that I can replace my firewall with this one? So let me repeat the question. The question was, can I replace my firewall with this Nutanix technology? The answer is no. We actually do not recommend that in any way. This feature of Nutanix, that this software-defined firewall policies per group of VMs, is actually meant to complement your existing firewalls. Because what happens is when an attack gets through the web firewall or any perimeter firewall of the organization, the chances of it moving while it's already inside the organization is higher. So the risks are higher when the malware attack is already inside. That's why Nutanix helps protect organizations between categories from the inside when an attack is already inside. That's why it's meant to complement your perimeter firewall. So they will work hand in hand to better strengthen the security posture of any organization, right? So again, that's ready for activation, nothing to install. It will also help you visualize how your apps talk to one another, right? So for example, today, if I ask maybe certain IT teams, Mr. Customer or Madam Customer, would you know or do you know all the ports accessing your most critical applications? So maybe the answer is maybe yes. I'll have to check with the security team, or sometimes, or maybe in a lot of cases, maybe no. We have to review that first, right? So with Nutanix Flow, you'll have a visual, a diagram inside the Nutanix GUI, inside the Nutanix GUI, showing you how these applications are talking to one another, which network IPs or segments they are using, what exact ports they are trying to use to communicate to one another. So you have that. And basically, the creation of policies take you a few clicks as long as you know which ones to allow or which ones to deny. So that's how we simplify or help simplify, secure the environment from the Nutanix point of view. Let's go to the third solution. The third solution I'm about to share with you, which is also inside the Nutanix platform, is how we help simplify database operations. Now, I would like to say, and I'm very excited to share this is actually a game changer for Nutanix, helping customers simplify database operations. And I know for a fact, and maybe most of you also know for a fact, that in a lot of cases, deploying and maintaining databases are not simple. That's why database administrators get the big bucks, right? It's because it's a very complex skill set that really takes a skilled person to provision, monitor, maintain, update on a day-to-day basis, right? So how do we help organizations simplify their database operations? So you have again this diagram. You have the hardware, the software, and the GUI, Prism Central, on your screens right now. The first step is to deploy a virtual machine that we call ERA, right? So Nutanix ERA is a virtual machine that gets deployed inside the Nutanix cluster first, right? So we deploy that first. And ERA is where all the magic that I'm about to talk about will happen. The second step is to enroll an existing database or provision a new one, right? So later on, I'll share with you the compatible databases in a bit. But as a step two, organizations after deploying ERA are able to quickly enroll an existing database or provision a new one. The third step is it will allow you or your organization to configure custom schedules for your backups or copies of your production, right? So we know for a fact databases need to get backed up for whatever purpose that we may need, for restore, for if it gets compromised later on, organizations need to be able to restore their backups easily, right? And a lot of organizations actually struggle with backups. If not with backups, then a lot of organizations still tend to struggle restoring from their backups. So within the Nutanix GUI and era, you're able to choose which backup you want to restore from. And with a few clicks, let Nutanix restore that backup for you. Now, in other use cases, customers create copies of their production environment for their production databases. And the reason for creating copies of their production database is for them to maybe run some other tasks on those copies, maybe run dev and test, maybe run reporting tools from copies of their productions, etc., etc. Now, to some organizations, that becomes a tedious task that requires resources, both CPU, memory, and storage resources. With Nutanix copy data management, you're able to make copies of your production databases with as little resources as possible. And with that, I mean, you don't have to consume the same amount of CPU, RAM, and storage resources just to create copies. So you save on resources in the future if you let Nutanix do that copy data management for you. The fourth step is you can upload patches and apply them to your virtual machines or your databases, right? So we do know for a fact that patches in a lot of cases are, I would say, headaches, especially for those customers that I have talked to. And we would get the feedback that it's very tedious. It's very hard for us to update and patch our database systems, and we need to test them time and time again just to ensure that we're able to successfully update or patch our database within a predetermined duration or time slot. Now, with Nutanix, you're able to upload the patches on the Nutanix GUI and then try to patch it on copies of your production so that you're able to see immediately if those patches will work or if you'll encounter errors along the way before you even apply those patches to your actual production database. Right? So now the million-dollar question is, Awee, which database flavors can Nutanix database operations support? So we have the following. So we support Oracle, Postgre, MySQL, MariaDB, Microsoft SQL Server, and SAP HANA. But I do want to level set the expectations of everyone here. The primary focus or priority of Nutanix when it comes to database flavors are Oracle, MS SQL, MySQL, and Postgre. That's where we focus on. So some of the features for MariaDB and SAP HANA tend to lag for a few months when it gets released for the priority database flavors. So those are our priorities. SQL, MS SQL, MySQL, Postgre, and Oracle databases. So that's how we simplify database operations from the Nutanix perspective. Now let's recap. So we already know that HCI is the foundation to help IT infrastructure and operations become easier for IT teams to manage and consume. Now, with HCI as the foundation, specifically Nutanix HCI as the foundation, you can do three things that will make your life a little bit easier. Number one is consolidate your file storage. Put them in the Nutanix platform so that you have a single pane of glass and you get a bonus of file analytics, which will help you make more sense out of your data, right? The second one is you can also secure the platform easily. by just activating a software and easily defining categories and VM firewall policies on each group or category, right? And the third one is to simplify database operations. So before, if you're trying to provision databases and patch them for maybe weeks or sometimes for other users or organizations, sometimes even months, you're able to reduce them to maybe just a few hours or maybe within 1 to 2 days, depending on the internal processes of their organization. Now, with the following solutions, Nutanix was able to prove that we're able to deliver excellent business outcomes. And from a study done by IDC in 2020, we were able to prove that we were able to reduce TCO of certain companies at 62%. The study also shows that we were able to reduce unplanned downtime by 85%. That study also shows a 477% 5-year ROI with 9 months to pay and an additional revenue of around almost $1 million per year. For those of you who want a copy of this IDC study, I'd be happy to share it with you guys. I'll share a QR code at the end of this presentation. Nutanix is also recognized as a leader by Gartner in the latest study released by Gartner in 2021. So this was released, Gartner released their HCI Magic Quadrant in October of last year. And hopefully they also release a new one this year by October this year. And from last year's study, we see that Nutanix is a clear leader in the HCI space. On the right side, from Forrester's point of view, Nutanix is also known as a leader from their latest study, which was way back in 2020. Because in 2021, Forrester did not release a study. And because of this recognition, Nutanix has had the privilege of helping numerous, actually 20,000 plus customers globally. Let's take a little bit more look at some of the customers we've helped. So you may be familiar with a retail giant called Home Depot. So they also chose the Nutanix platform, and they chose the database solution that I showed you earlier. And they're using Oracle databases and MS SQL databases in their organization. And with that, they're able to reduce their TCO and specifically reduce their provisioning from 3 weeks to 1 hour. Let's look at another customer, RBL Bank in India. RBL Bank actually also used the Nutanix platform and the database solution that I shared with you earlier. And because of that, they were able to increase their productivity, right? And they were able to roll out applications 8 times faster, according to their internal study, plus an annual savings of almost $250,000. Another customer, Black Hills Energy, and I'm actually excited also to share this because their use case is actually Citrix VDI workloads running on the Nutanix cloud platform, right? And because of that, they were able to increase the productivity of their users by moving to Nutanix and also using Citrix technology on top of the Nutanix platform. Citrix technology, by the way, it has this partnership with Nutanix on the engineering level. So we co-develop systems together for better integration. So for those of you who are maybe looking into Citrix VDI, Citrix has announced that Nutanix is their preferred HCI platform. And likewise, for Nutanix, Citrix is our preferred VDI system to run on our platform, right? Another thing that you guys may be familiar with is Trek, a manufacturer of bikes. For those of you who are into biking, so Trek is also a Nutanix customers. They are using VMware on top of the Nutanix platform. So you can also do that. You can run VMware on top of the Nutanix platform. And in doing so, they had a 66% reduction in the number of the employees who are trying to manage the entire IT infrastructure. And they were able to turn around requests from weeks to just a few hours with a few engineers monitoring service tickets from IT. And with data consolidation, the one we talked about earlier, how they consolidated their data inside the Nutanix platform, they were able to reduce their storage and compute data center footprint by around 75% based on their internal study. On the business sector in the US, so the San Francisco District Attorney also uses the Nutanix platform, and they were also able to cut infrastructure management time in half. And from their administrators, they were telling the Nutanix from San Francisco that their administrators were able to do more and focus on more important products instead of having to focus on managing the IT infrastructure. So talk about automation, talk about simplifying infrastructure. We believe that Nutanix is the solution to help you make your IT day-to-day tasks and operations easier. For those who would want to try, we have a test drive. You can just Google it actually, Nutanix test drive, and it's at no cost, no hardware to provision, and it will guide you on how to use and consume a Nutanix cluster if you have it in your Nutanix environment. So just Google Nutanix test drive, and you will be directed to a link that will help you do so, right? For those who would want, and I promised this from earlier, for those who want a copy of the IDC report and a white paper that talks about the things that I just shared, database consolidation, securing the infrastructure easier through Nutanix, and also helping simplify your database operations, please scan the QR code. I just have 3 questions there. You get to answer it in maybe 10, maybe 20 seconds, maybe as I'm talking right now. And for those who need a link, I'll paste the link in the chat later on. And we'd be happy to share some white papers and maybe discuss with your teams later on.